Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome again to Syriana Analysis. I'm your host, Almassian. This live streaming started interestingly as 30 seconds before the live stream, I dropped the teacup on myself. So I had to run to the kitchen to dry the tea here that I dropped on myself. So my apologies that I started a few seconds later this live streaming. And in the previous live streaming with Andreas the Zayas, he had some technical difficulties. I'm always one of the commentators who was saying like Pünktlichkeit or on time. I'm always trying to be on time. Unfortunately, there were some technical problems on his side that he couldn't come on time. So I had to postpone it a few times, but it was really worth it. This was one of the best interviews that I personally have done. Actually, I didn't ask much questions. He was already answering most of the questions that I asked him. So if you want to know more about South Africa's proceedings, legal proceedings in the International Court of Justice against Israel, accusing Israel of committing genocide and violating the Genocide Convention. The live streaming before this, it's very interesting to understand the legality and the legal basis of this case. And in this video, he also spoke about the Syrian case, which was very interesting. And I want to start this conversation with you guys. I want to tell you that I'm a little bit bothered. I'm a little bit angry today. I wanted to host a guest today in order to address a recent actually interview that Talk TV presenter Julia Hartley Brewer, she hosted a Palestinian politician Mustafa Barghouti, who is a very, very respectful person in the West Bank, and she treated him very badly. She patronized him. She spewed really racist rhetoric during this. And you know me, I hate this exclusionary discussion that everything that somebody says that you disagree with is racism, but this was blatant racism against him. So I wanted to host someone with a Palestinian or Syrian or from any other country. And I go to the profile of this person, just I want to check the background, right? Who I'm going to invite. And every time I go and scroll down and I see that these people are very, very critical of the US manipulation and the US media and the mainstream media manipulation and lies they're spewing about Palestine. But at the same time, they cannot see through similar lies that have been spewed about Syria. And to be honest with you, I don't want to give a platform to someone and increase the popularity of this person or his following or her following. Later, this person comes spews something against my country. I don't understand how can some people not see through the lies and manipulation of the United States against Syria, but at the same time they say the United States is manipulating the public audience when it comes to Palestine. This is something that I cannot understand. And this is why I get really bothered, because I don't want to seriously like host someone that played a role in the American led and engineered quote unquote revolution in Syria and help them. So some of these people were like speaking about US imperialism and unconditional support to Israel. They criticize it, but when it comes to Syria, they support the rebels, of course, so called rebels, supported by the United States, by the CIA, by the Pentagon. The CIA and the Pentagon, they said we supported this group. It's not like me that I found somehow the conspiracies, right? And the NGOs that work in Syria, in the rebel-held areas, all supported by the US, by France, by Britain, and the same powers that support nowadays Israel. Also, the media outlets and the media personalities in Syria, in some of these rebel-held areas, who's funding them? The US, Britain, Germany, France, all these countries now supporting Israel. Where are the white helmets, by the way? Like in the past years, they even made a documentary about the white helmets on Netflix, that these rescue groups, right, rescuing children and civilians in Syria, where are they from what's happening in the Gaza Strip? Where are the funders and sponsors of the white helmets to establish something like the white helmets in the Gaza Strip to save the babies and the children under the rubble? They don't do such things, right? I don't understand how can they support unequivocally, like unconditionally, these groups in Syria, but at the same time they support the opposite groups in Palestine. And today I was watching the page of Afikai Adrai. Afikai Adrai, he is the spokesperson of the Israeli occupation forces in Arabic, and he's hosting a Syrian opposition journalist in Tel Aviv. And she's saying, our enemy is not Israel, our enemy is the Syrian regime, Hamas. This is how she says Hamas. She's even talking like them. And Hezbollah. This is what she said. So I really want, for the people who have not awakened yet on the case of Syria, this was not an organic, homemade, homegrown revolution. It was engineered by the CIA, engineered by the deep states in the United States. And this is probably, some people say, oh, Kevork, you're Syrian, you're not objective, you're biased, etc., etc. I may understand them. I never said that I'm objective, but I'm I never lied to you, and I always try to bring sources when I spoke about these cases, and we address this very in details on Syriana Analysis, right? And one of the guests that I hosted recently, Alfred Desayas, that I already mentioned his name recently, this is what he said about the Syrian case. He said the United States, excuse me, not this one, the another one, Andres Desayas. Let me see. So Alfred Desayas. Why I'm saying Andres? So Alfred Desayas says, okay, I think this is the one, not this one. Because there are two videos I want to show you of Alfred Desayas, and one of which is this. Yeah, he says, what the United States has done in Syria is unbelievable. Every time the US bombs Syria, it's another violation of international law, which requires compensation to the Syrian people. He also mentions the origins of the war. And Alfred Desayas is a former UN senior independent expert on the promotion of a democratic and equitable international order. He's an expert in international law, he's an expert in human rights, and he has authored many books about these cases. And he's very critical of this case. So don't take it from me. Take it from Andres. Why I'm calling in Andres? Alfred Desayas, and see what he says in this regard.
What the United States has done in Syria is unbelievable, because the United States has zero right, zero, to be in Syria, and it is stealing the Syrian oil. I mean, nobody invited the United States to Syria. I am no friend of Vladimir Putin. I'm no friend of the Russians. But the legitimate president of Syria did invite Russia to assist in his fight against terrorism and against an uprising that was not, shall we say, a homegrown uprising. It's not a question of the self-determination of the people of Syria. It's not the question of the Arab Spring in Syria. It's a question that, as we know from General
Davy?
No, the General Walters. I have a quote from him in the chapter on the right to peace. It is finally
Wesley Clark.
No, I'm looking for the quote because it's so revealing, and of course Syria was targeted by the United States. It was an intention to let me see, where is it? Going to the index.
Are we speaking about General Wesley Clark?
Yes, of course.
Yeah. Yeah. Can I play the video for you? I have the video here in my hand, just for the people.
Because it's so important.
Just for the people to refresh their memory what happened.
Yeah.
I will play it now.
About 10 days after 9/11, I went through the Pentagon and I saw Secretary Rumsfeld and Deputy Secretary Wolfowitz. I went downstairs just to say hello to some of the people on the Joint Staff who had used to work for me. And one of the generals called me and he said, "Sir, you got to come in. You got to come in and talk to me a second." I said, "Well, you're too busy." He said, "No." He says, "We've made the decision. We're going to war with Iraq." This was on or about the 20th of September. I said, we're going to war with Iraq. Why? He said, I don't know. He said, I guess they don't know what else to do. So I said, well, did they find some information connecting Saddam to Al-Qaeda? He said, no. He says, there's nothing new that way. They just made the decision to go to war with Iraq. He said, I guess it's like we don't know what to do about terrorists, but we've got a good military and we can take down governments. And he said, I guess if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem has to look like a nail. So I came back to see him a few weeks later. And by that time, we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, are we still going to war with Iraq? And he said, oh, it's worse than that. He said, he reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper. He said, I just got this down from upstairs, meaning the Secretary of Defense office today. And he said, this is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran.
So,
well, if that is not proof of an animus on the part of the U.S. government to, well, be the imperial power and just change governments at will, massive violation of the UN Charter, massive violation of international law, with total impunity and with the complicity of the media, because the media has sold the war in Syria as a war for human rights. I mean, we are supposed to kick out Assad because he's a dictator and because he's corrupt and because he's a criminal. And then we want to try him. Not only that, I mean, we want to, replace him with a puppet from Washington, and then we want to try Assad. I'm not defending Assad. He's not a friend of mine. On the other hand, as I said here in my book, Chapter 7, The Prohibition of Interference in the Internal Affairs of States, it starts with the quotation by General Wesley Clark, which you just showed your audience. Now, that means responsibility of the United States for war crimes and crimes against humanity. And every time that the United States bombs Syria, it's another violation of international law, which requires compensation to the Syrian people. People tend to forget that. The United States owes the world trillions of dollars in compensation for all the damage that it has done over 100 years of overthrowing governments.
So, don't take it from me. This is Alfred Desayas, former senior UN expert. I also hosted Scott Ritter. He was a former US Marine intelligence officer. Jeffrey Sachs, he speaks about the US engineered revolution, quote unquote, in Syria, and he names it with the title that the CIA had a covert operation in Syria, Timber Sycamore. So those are all. It's now so openly discussed, right? Therefore, it disgusts me. I don't want to speak and host these people on my channel who participated in the misery of my people. And we had a conversation today with a friend of mine on X, and I said recently I came across. Let me just fix this. Yes, recently I came across several people on X who are vocal in their criticism of the US and its unconditional support of the Israeli onslaught on Gaza. It is depressing how many of them supported and still support the US engineered revolution in Syria. And he said his opinion is correct here. He said, try not to take it too much to heart. At the heart of all US backed regime change operations is weaponizing the people's will to do good and help people, which is why they desperately want absolute control of the internet. Keep telling the truth and educating. That is the only way we can fight back. And this is what Alfred Desayas also said. That is why he blamed the media, because they're complicit with selling the narrative that this was about human rights and democracy in Syria. And I said over 500,000 people died in Syria. Millions became refugees and half the country has been destroyed. I hope our online work helps other people and these experiences won't be repeated in their countries. And this is one of the reasons why I started Syriana Analysis to begin with. I was suffocated. I wanted to tell the stories of millions of people in Syria and also stop the repetition of similar experiences and mayhem in other countries. And that's why when the Ukraine war started, although I have studied the Ukraine case previously, but I put so much effort in educating myself about the Ukraine geopolitical importance of Ukraine so that I can present the root causes of the conflict there in order to tell the truth about the Ukraine war, in order to uh, like to block the way and stop these similar atrocities that may happen and happened in Ukraine, right? Hundreds of thousands of people perished. For what? For what? What was the reason for that? When Ukraine was able to strike a peace deal with Russia in February, March, maximum April 2022, which the Americans and the Brits stopped. And when I spoke about that, I was called a Putinist, right? I was called, I'm spreading Kremlin talking points. And now this is a public info. Everybody can access this type of information, something that we have spoken about 2 years ago. Similarly, when the pandemic, of course, quote unquote, happened, and we weren't against it, and how the governments are using the health crisis to centralize the powers, and how they are imposing draconian measures on the people for their own benefits, not for our benefits. But again, because they manipulated the people, persuaded them with fear, many people accepted it. But we were warning against it. And then 2-3 years later, it's a public information. Everybody knows it. It's accessible. That's why it's very important, guys, for independent journalists, honest journalists. I can see the comments here that some of them say, yes, you're not objective, but you're accurate. This is what I try to do here. I never tried to manipulate the people, and I would never tell a lie. And I say my conviction the way it is. I may hit or miss, but this is my conviction, and I'm here telling you what I believe in. And I will never claim to be objective in this regard. And before we continue this live stream, guys, if you can, please hit the like button now while you're watching. We are around 250 people now watching this live streaming. It would be really good to hit the like button because the algorithm of YouTube starts recommending this video to other people, and other people also join. And when the live streaming is over, other people can see this video. Now, we're moving to the topic of today's live streaming, and that is how the United States is getting ready for war. And this is a new article in the Financial Times. It's published by Emil Hukayem. He says the edge of abyss looms in the Middle East. And this guy, he's not, by the way, let's say, on the side of Hezbollah or on the side of the Houthis or affiliated with Iran, etc. No, he works for a think tank in Britain, and this think tank is based in London, and it's considered one of the best think tanks in the world. And all these think tanks, they have their affiliations, right? And this think tank was funded at sometimes from the Bahraini government, and the Bahraini government is on the opposite side of Iran and Hezbollah and all this stuff. But he's warning us that we are close to the edge of abyss. Forcing Palestine on the regional agenda, he says, was evidently one of Hamas's many goals when it began its slaughter in Israel on October 7th. So bear in mind, he is, of course, anti-Hamas. So the wording and the terminologies are against Hamas. And I'm not saying that we have to be with Hamas. I'm just saying so that we be careful of the wordings. So one of the goals of Hamas in October 7 was to turn this issue into a regional agenda, according to him. Only days later, a large-scale Israeli attack against Hezbollah in Lebanon was averted thanks to U.S. pressure. Now, U.S., yes, they exerted lots of pressure on Israel, and they warned against escalation in the northern border of Israel or in some southern Lebanon. They were sending messengers to envoys to Lebanon through France and through other envoys, and they warned of escalation. And Hezbollah said they are not interested in regional war because they know if Hezbollah intervenes, Israel cannot match the power of Hezbollah when it comes to the ground offensive. When Hezbollah wages ground offensive, Israel will need the backing of the United States directly, the interference of the fighter jets, the interference of the warships, the interference of the aircraft carriers, and probably other military facilities as well, and probably boots on the ground. Therefore, in my opinion, and this is also the opinion of the author, Israel is the only power now in the region that is interested in regional war. Okay, and the United States wanted to avert that. They tried to exert pressure on Israel and also on Hezbollah through the mediators. Hezbollah said they're not interested, but up until this moment, in my opinion, Israel is still provoking these regional powers for wider regional war because it will trigger American intervention. So now, the author continues. The most surprising, he said, sorry, here. Since then, Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen have become both targets and launch pads. The most surprising geopolitical developments is the Houthi success in disrupting maritime traffic in the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. The past 10 days show how close to the edge of the abyss the region is. There have been suspected killing, it's not suspected, but there have been a killing by Israel of the top Iranian commander in Syria and the deputy Hamas political leader in Lebanon, and by the US of a senior Iranian-backed Iraqi commander. I think this is a little bit contradiction here. If the United States doesn't want for the region to, let's say, to crumble into a regional war, why the United States bombed an Iraqi commander inside Iraq and murdered him? It's just a mystery. The apparent slide towards a US led intervention against the Houthis in Yemen could also be a sign of an acceleration, he said. One can find relief in the fact that the 2006 war between Israel and Hezbollah and previous US and Israeli assassinations of even more important Hamas, Hezbollah, and Iranian leaders didn't trigger broader conflict. So here the author clearly says, without saying, that Hezbollah, Iran, and other players in the region, those who are against Israel and the United States, aren't interested in a regional war. And he says that despite this assassination of the high ranking officials of Iran, of Hezbollah, of Hamas, there is a relief that this war hasn't expanded because basically these powers aren't interested in a regional war. He continues, but the difference now is context, scope, tempo, and perception. More senior leaders are being killed, and more attacks of significance are being conducted across more theaters in a compressed period. Meanwhile, Israel's assault on Gaza continues, antagonizing the region's population. Iran and Israel will decide whether the conflict becomes all-out war or remains a competition for regional influence. While Tehran worries that its credibility and deterrence are being eroded, Iran still views its ultimate objectives as better achieved through 1,000 small cuts than costly head-on confrontation. So the strategy of Iran, according to the author, which I agree with, they don't have to go to regional war and all-out war against a nuclear power like Israel. They can overcome the American and Israeli hegemony in the region by small gains. Every year, if they gain a small gains here, a small gains there, and since 2003 in Iraq, the influence of Iran has expanded greatly, right? Before 2003, Iran had no influence, for example, in Iraq. And now Iran has influence in Syria. Iran's influence in Lebanon has grown. Iran's influence in Yemen has grown. And I'm not saying dominance, right? I'm saying influence. They have more allies in the region than they used to be before 2003. And they are coming closer and closer and closer to the interests, the economic interests, security interests, political interests of the United States and Israel. But slowly, step by step, it takes time, it takes years, it takes decades instead of opening an all-out war and going into suicidal missions. This is the strategy of Israel in this regard. And I agree with the assessment of the author here. So Iran still views its ultimate objective as better achieved through 1,000 small cuts than costly head-on confrontation. Hezbollah, its most formidable partner, is a battle-hardened force with advanced missile capabilities and strategic depth. Finally, some really real expert agreed with me that Hezbollah is a very formidable force and they have lots of capabilities that I think the Israelis are underestimating. It is constrained by only two factors: fear and exhaustion within Lebanese society and Iran's preference to keep it in reserve to deter Israel and the US in case of an existential fight in the future. So I totally agree with this. I told you guys one of the reasons why Hezbollah doesn't open a wide front against Israel and is not interested in opening a wide front against Israel, even after the assassination of the Hamas leader inside one of the areas that is considered an area of influence of Hezbollah, which is in the southern Beirut, because Hezbollah knows the internal and domestic calculations in Lebanon and knows that at least half the people in Lebanon, those who are against Hezbollah, they are part of the pro US political bloc. They will not accept the Lebanon going into war against Hezbollah, and they will exert internal pressure against Hezbollah and the allies of Hezbollah. Therefore, Hezbollah will only go to war, in my opinion, and wide, let's say, all scale war with Israel when and if Israel wages a ground offensive and ground invasion against Lebanon. That's the only time, and this was also declared by the Secretary General of Hezbollah, Nasrallah, 2 days ago in his speech, and when he said, if Israel invades Lebanon, then there will not be calculations. There is not going to be any restraints, and there is not going to be any limits for the retaliation. And that's the only time I think, and I believe, that Hezbollah will go into an all-out war against Israel. And also, the other reason is because Iran prefers to save its military and economic might in the case of an existential fight in the future. They don't want to exhaust or drain all their capabilities now. Instead, Iran's regional partners are leveraging the conflict to reinforce their domestic positions and assert their resistance against Western-enabled imperialism. The countdown to the end of the US presence in Syria and Iraq has started. This is really surprising for me, coming from a mainstream, let's say, expert writing for the Financial Times and saying that the end of the American presence in Iraq and Syria is coming very soon. So I really don't know. I don't have information that there is any readiness or any preparation for kicking out the American forces. Maybe the Americans will withdraw by themselves. I'm not sure about that. Above all, he says, a traumatized Israel has shown a much higher risk tolerance and ruthlessness than Western officials expected. Military defeat of Hamas was an achievable, let's see, was an achievable objective through patient and calibrated force. Instead, Israel has articulated more expensive goals and adopted questionable military practices, creating a humanitarian tragedy and raising the prospect of a strategic failure, while it seeks cathartic revenge. Hamas is playing for time to win the narrative battle. Both have scant regard for Palestinian suffering. The US deserves some credit for preventing all out regional war until now, but it seems bereft of ideas, unable to deploy leverage, and struggling with moral vicissitudes. What's the. Seriously, I had to pronounce this several times, and I even wrote it on Google Translation to see vicissitudes. Anyways, the war in Gaza is a reminder that the conflicts cannot be frozen and ignored, as has become painfully obvious in the past few decades. They cannot be won purely on the battlefield. They must be solved fairly, however complex and frustrating it is to do so. So, what do you think, guys, of this article? I partially agree with him of his assessment of Hezbollah, Iran's involvement, and Israel's readiness to go further in this conflict. And it's surprising coming from an article in the Financial Times, but it's a good assessment, in my opinion. If you leave the wordings, let's say subjective wordings aside, most of the ideas raised in this article, it's accurate, and we are coming closer and closer to the edge of abyss. And I think today Hezbollah said that phase one of its retaliation against Israel for assassinating Hamas leader in Beirut was today, and they bombed surveillance and radars in Israel, which is responsible for the aerial surveillance in the north. They say that they have, I think they shot around 60 missiles and rockets, and they say that they hit all the targets. And unfortunately, I cannot show this video because YouTube is so sensitive, and it's becoming so ridiculous, because every time I try to show some video like this, they either try to delete the video or they demonetize it because they say it's graphic or it's coming from, they say, violent organizations. So I have to be careful in this regard. However, another article this time comes from this time from the Politico, actually. And the Politico goes further, and they say that the war in Gaza may widen, and the Biden admin is getting ready for it. So it's no more about averting or trying to stop a regional war, but rather when will this wider war will happen. Biden administration officials are drawing up plans for the US to respond to what they are increasingly concerned could expand from a war in Gaza to a wider protracted regional conflict. Four officials familiar with the matter, including a senior administration official, described internal conversations about scenarios that could potentially draw the US into another Middle East war. All were granted anonymity to speak about sensitive, ongoing national security discussions. So this is not something that is a report. It's coming from senior Biden administration officials telling the Politico or the author about what conversations are happening behind closed doors, and the Biden administration is getting ready for war in the Middle East. What do you think about that, guys? Don't you think that the war in the Middle East is going to be not only very costly for the United States, but also will accelerate the downfall of the US empire? Because, in my opinion, this is not 2001, this is not 2003, this is not 2006, this is not 2011. The US is not in the perfect shape. The US economy is not in the perfect shape. The US has suffered defeat in its proxy war in Ukraine, has withdrawn from Afghanistan, and now another costly war in the region will only accelerate, in my opinion, printing more money, more inflation in the United States, and accelerating the economic crash in the United States. The United States, like, what's the debt of the United States? How much the U.S. debt is? So $34 trillion, guys. The national debt hits $34 trillion. The US national debt ended the year with a milestone, crossing the 34 trillion mark on December 29, 2023. This is the debt of the United States, guys. So I don't think that the United States going into war in the region is going to be a playground. I think regional players, especially Iran, although they don't want a wide war, but they could see the US initiating war in the region as an opportunity to hit the United States' interest in the region and hence accelerate its downfall after the failed Ukraine proxy war. So the military is drafting plans to hit back at Iran-backed Houthi militants who have been attacking commercial shipping in the Red Sea, according to 3 US officials with direct knowledge of the discussions. That includes striking Houthi targets in Yemen, according to one of the officials. So not only in the Red Sea, in the regional waters, but also inside of Yemen, they are planning to hit Houthi targets. Intelligence officials, meanwhile, are coming up with ways to anticipate and fend off possible attacks on the US by Iranian backed forces in Iraq and Syria. According to one of the officials, they are also working to determine where the Houthi militants may strike next. It's an escalation that could result in President Joe Biden becoming more deeply embroiled in the Middle East, just as the 2024 campaign season heats up and his campaign pushes to focus on domestic issues. This is an interesting point because I don't know how this is going to be translated in the upcoming elections. What do you think, guys? How will, if the United States and the Biden administration now wages this war in the region and intervenes in, let's say, in the region again, how is it going to impact the results and the outcome of the next elections? Will it help RFK? Will it help Trump? Or will it give more momentum to Biden? Please let me know in the comments. I don't know about that. The potential for wider conflict is growing, officials said, following a series of confrontations in Iraq, Lebanon, and Iran over the past several days. Those have convinced some in the administration that the war in Gaza has officially escalated far beyond the Strip's borders, a scenario the US has tried to avoid for months. So I truly don't know, guys, if this war is going to happen, but it's very possible. It's very possible. And the reaction of Hezbollah and Iran indicates that they have, also Syria in this regard, that they have lots of might and strategic depth, let's say, and they're keeping it for probably the 0 hour. And this is also a question that lots of people ask me about Syria. Why don't Syria retaliate against Israel? I'm not here making excuses. I'm here to explain the mentality in the region, in Syria. I know how the Syrian decision making happens. And in this case, Syria doesn't use its strategic weaponry. Historically, if you see the conflict between Syria and Israel, every time there was an all out war, let's say in the 73, or in 82 in Lebanon, or in any other time, Syria always had surprises for Israel, and they always hide some of their strategic weaponaries, especially the defensive ones, the air defenses, the batteries. There are so many things that Israel doesn't know in Syria. So I suspect that Syria, of course, is not interested at all in a regional war, but if it's imposed on Syria, of course, there will be surprises. And I'm sure that Syria is hiding some surprises for Israel. Similarly, of course, Israel is doing the same thing. But what I'm saying is that these countries aren't like sleepy and just waiting for their turn to come so that America or Israel can occupy them. No, they're also getting ready. And they have learned from the mistakes of the previous countries who have fallen victim for American imperialism in the region. Now I'm going to show you a very depressing, actually, article, and this is coming from Mother Jones. And Mother Jones, they have published an article that is very depressive, to be honest with you. And they say how Joe Biden became America's top Israel hawk. So brace yourself, guys, because this is a little bit, to be honest, depressive to see how Biden became the top hawk for Israel. The author says last month, a reporter asked President Joe Biden about the chances for a ceasefire in Gaza. More than 10,000 people had already been killed there. This is 2 weeks old or 3 weeks old article. More than 10,000 people had already been killed there. Most of them are women and children. Food, water, and medical supplies were scarce. Still, the president didn't hesitate in assessing the odds of a ceasefire that he had more power than almost anyone in the world to help bring about. He said, none, no possibility. Biden's unconditional support for Israel as it waged one of the most devastating bombing campaigns in modern history was already at odds with most of the world and significant parts of his own political base. The president showed no sign of backing down. It would take another month and nearly 8,000 more Palestinian deaths for Biden to criticize Israel in any meaningful way. At a closed door fundraiser last week, he warned that Israel's indiscriminate bombing was costing the country international support. So he wasn't really like worried about the killing that is happening in the Gaza Strip and the babies that are dying and the women and the men and the innocent people who are dying every day with hundreds in the Gaza Strip. But he was worried that the indiscriminate bombing was costing Israel international support and also the United States. But Biden's own support for the government of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu remained largely intact. After saying he favored the eventual creation of a Palestinian state, he reiterated his unwavering backing for the Jewish nation. Quote, "We are not going to do a damn thing other than protect Israel," Biden said. Not a single thing. So, this is coming from Biden, guys. It's so shameful, man. It's so shameful. Much of Biden's difference to Israel is deeply personal. As his supporters have put it, he identifies with the nation in his kishkes, his guts. Both before and after October 7, the empathy Biden is known for has rarely extended to Palestinians. Rashid Khalidi, the Edward Said Professor of Modern Arab Studies at Columbia University, said, "Such statements are missing to the degree that I don't really think he sees the Palestinians at all." In contrast, Khalidi added, Biden sees Israelis as they are very carefully presented by their government and their massive information apparatus. A former Biden administration official shared a similar perspective with me. He said, quote, "The president doesn't seem to acknowledge the humanity of all parties affected by this conflict. He has described Israeli suffering in great detail, while Palestinian suffering is left vague if mentioned at all." Yeah, he doesn't see the Palestinians existing there. I mean, this is also coming from the Israeli officials. They don't see that they are Palestinians, they see them as flies. Like, they call them subhumans. They're calling them human animals, right? Of course, they don't see them as human beings. And how would they feel the suffering of the Palestinians if they don't see them as humans anyway? Biden has prioritized providing Israel largely unconditional support and the space to continue fighting in the face of intense international opposition. This approach is predictable in some respects. Israel has gotten almost whatever it wants from the United States for decades, and any American president would have supported Israel in the wake of a Hamas attack that took the lives of 1,200 people. But Biden has long gone further than many of his fellow Democrats in defense of Israel. As a senator, for example, he backed moving the American embassy to Jerusalem decades before Donald Trump made that a reality, boasted about attending more fundraisers for the American Israel Public Affairs, APAC, than any other senator, and savaged an effort by George W. Bush to push Israel toward negotiating with Palestinians. As vice president, he undercut Obama's efforts to push Israel toward peace. As president, prior to the October 7, he continued policies implemented by Trump that sidelined Palestinians. I think maybe he had the author of the article, he had to put this video, I think, in the explanation. Probably this gives us a little bit explanation why Biden supports Israel unconditionally. Probably this one explains it, right?
We stop those of us who support, as most of us do, Israel in this body, for apologizing for our support for Israel. There's no apology to be made. None. It is the best $3 billion investment we make. Were there not an Israel, the United States of America would have to invent an Israel to protect her interest in the region. The United States would have to.
So, guys, if there was no Israel nowadays, the United States had to go and create an Israel. It's the best $3 billion investment ever. And this is, I think, from the 90s. This is what he believes in. This is the same thing that also RFK believes in, by the way. He says that Israel represents the eyes and the ears of Israel in the region, and it's an aircraft carrier for the United States in the region. So they don't see Israel as like an ally or a friend. They see it like an aircraft carrier, right? Israel as, taking care of the interests of the United States in the region, which usually they are interconnected. But now it seems that there is serious talk about how the approach of Israel in the Gaza Strip is harming the American national security interests. And to be honest with you, if I'm an American decision maker, do you really think that I would like to go to a regional war in the region now? Is it in the interest of the American national security? Is it in the interest of my people? Of course not. Of course not. This is Israel's war. And there were so many wars in the region, like when I say so many wars, for example, Iraq war, and there were other wars in the region or conflicts in the region that were not in the interest of the United States to intervene, but eventually intervened because Israel convinced the United States to intervene. But this time it's different because Israel is accused of committing genocide, and the United States is assisting Israel in this genocide. And if the Israeli side is convicted of committing a genocide, then the United States will also be convicted of assisting and being complicit with the genocide. And this was, again, from Alfred Desayas, which, again, I published it on Syriana Analysis. And this segment, he speaks, if the International Court of Justice comes to the conclusion that Israel is committing genocide, then the United States will be considered complicit in the genocide, will be also hit by the ICJ. Let's take a look together what he said in this regard.
In the Palestinian case, in the Gaza case, there is a vicarious responsibility. Serbia was convicted of not doing the necessary to prevent genocide. So here was not the active commission of genocide by Serbia, but it was the failure of Serbia to
prevent,
to rein in the Serbs of the Republika Srpska, the Serbian part of Bosnia and Herzegovina, and prevent them from committing genocide. Who is going to be hit by this violation of the convention? The United States.
Mm-hmm.
Because the United States has failed to stop the killing, and it's complicit in the killing. I mean, it is such a disgrace that the United States actually dared to put in a veto against the Security Council resolution. It was only one veto, the United States. France voted in favor of it. The United Kingdom didn't quite dare, so they abstained. But it was 13 votes in favor, 1 abstention, 1 veto by the United States. That makes the United States complicit. And what is important is that under, quite classical interpretation of the convention, what are the crimes? Since the intent is already proven. I mean, the statements are amazing. What Netanyahu and his ministers have said. That shows more than enough the intent to destroy in whole or in part the Palestinian people. Now, here you have Article 2 that defines genocide as A, killing members of the group, B, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group, and C, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part.
Yes.
Absolutely clear. All 3 have been committed. And then Article 3 says that the following acts shall be punishable: genocide, conspiracy to commit genocide, direct and public incitement to commit genocide. If you see what some American politicians, American senators have been saying, and congressmen, I mean, they are guilty of direct and public incitement to commit genocide. And then attempt to commit genocide, and most importantly, Article 3, paragraph little e, complicity in genocide.
Yes.
The United States is complicit in the genocide. And so is the European Union. So is the United Kingdom. That's why this case is so incredibly important.
So, guys, this case is incredibly important, and according to Alfred Desayas, the United States is complicit in violating the Genocide Convention of the International Court of Justice and assisting Israel in the continuation of this war. I really don't know what is going to happen next. On the 11th and the 12th of this month, there will be hearings. And if the International Court of Justice orders a ceasefire, and what happens next if the United States vetoes again? What happens next if Israel doesn't abide by the ruling of the court? Because, to be honest with you, we're living in a jungle, right? And I don't think that the Israelis and the Americans are going to abide by it. But this will completely end anything that they say about rules-based order, international law, that they are here to spread order, rules, etc., etc. They will completely lose their reputation. Like, there is not going to be a single person around the world unless this person is completely brainwashed or completely ideologically radicalized. Nobody will believe them anymore, and that is a good thing for the world. I hope that more people would wake up and see through the lies and the manipulations of the US empire that happened recently. And that's why independent journalists are very, very important. And their role is very important in exposing these greedy, psychopathic, powerful people in Washington, D.C. who have inflicted so much pain on the people around the world. And however, there are also type of journalists like this, and this is what I was speaking of at the beginning of this video, something that will disgust you completely, guys. And I don't know how they even feel that they had to post this on social media, because nowadays journalism has become only about clickbaits and how much the journalist thinks that he or she is the center of the news and not here to tell you the news. And people like Piers Morgan and people like this Julia, they just want to focus on themselves. They're so narcissistic that they make the news about themselves. That's why they posted this video. Otherwise, if I'm a respectable journalist, I wouldn't like this video to come online. Take a look first, and we will discuss it together.
You say you don't approve
And
of.
do you think that Israel is a democratic country?
I
Netanyahu
know
is
that
destroying
Israel is a democracy. They
democracy.
have elections.
No, this man is now has 4 courts against him because of
Yes,
4 cases
I
of
know.
corruption. This man knows
Okay.
if the war stops,
we
he
haven't
will go
got
to
time to do
jail.
the entire history of
And that's-
Benjamin
and that's
Netanyahu,
what-
who is
this
not a
is
popular
history.
figure in Israel.
When
I'm
I
not
ever
here to
speak
defend
about
Benjamin
Palestinian
Netanyahu.
rights,
Mustafa, is it possible to...
whenever I speak
Right.
whenever I speak about Palestinian rights or
No.
Palestinian situation, you claim it is history. I'm talking about what's happening today.
No, I know, and
this
I'm
is
trying
not history.
Can we just... You talked about how you don't want Israel. You're saying Israel, that October the 7th happened. You're placing that in historical context. I understand that. Please don't say that again. We don't have time for it. You've made that point 5 times already.
I don't know
Okay.
what you have time
Oh my
for. Let
God!
me
For
explain
the love
myself.
of God, let me finish a sentence, man. Maybe you're not used to women talking. I don't know, but I'd like to finish a sentence, sir. Anyway, so
No, you are misleading the public now
really,
by claiming
right? I've got
this
20
thing that
seconds
you
left. I'm
just
not
said.
even going to bother trying to
And,
answer.
what
If you don't think
ask me the
Israel's
question.
reaction is acceptable, what would have been an acceptable reaction to you? You've got 10 seconds left.
To end occupation and allow peace to prevail for both people.
That's their react. Brilliant. Yeah. Sorry to have been a woman speaking to you, but there you are, Doctor.
What is this, guys? Why even these people are even called journalists? I mean, if you watch this video on mute it and watch it, you would think that she's mentally challenged person. She just escaped from the stubble or from the mental care center or something. This is not journalism, and it's so racist what she said. Maybe you're not used to talk to a woman. Like, what is she indicating for? What is she implying for? That he is Palestinian? He is Arab? You know that this guy is a medical doctor and he's a very respectful Palestinian politician in the West Bank. And despite the insults, he just kept his posture and he didn't say bad words, or he didn't, interact with her in the same level that she's trying to drag the conversation to. She's horrible, man. I don't understand how can even this be considered a journalism, and how can even Talk TV employ such people. This is becoming a clown show, you know. This is becoming a clown show. And just to give you a perspective of this is an article published today on this exact matter in the Middle East Eye. They say war on Gaza, the voices that really matter are the journalists on the ground. I summarized it. I will just tell you the attitude here. This encounter tells us a great deal about how the Western media works, in particular, the often bigoted and racist coverage of the war in Gaza. Bear in mind that Hartley Brewer is not remotely the worst offender, he says. Today, however, she has become part of a system of reporting that is about attracting attention and generating anger. Hartley Brewer exemplifies this by setting herself up to be far more important than either the story or her guest. She needs reminding that a proper journalist should always try not to be part of this story. This type of journalism doesn't allow for complexity or 2 points of view. It reduces complex subjects to simple solutions which can appeal only to people who know nothing about the matter under discussion. In this way, it debases discourse and poisons our public life. In general, Western journalists tend to treat Israeli politicians with much more respect than Palestinian officials. Here is a topical case in point. On Thursday, LBC presenter Lane Daley interviewed the Israeli ambassador to the UK, Tzipi. What's her name? Tzipi Hotovli. Hotovli has made many shocking statements that should put her beyond the pale. She has rejected the two-state solution and denied both Palestinian rights and the Nakba. Even so, she regularly gets invited on British media. Daley treated her with courtesy and respect. I'm not criticizing Dali. His soft-spoken approach might have encouraged Hotovli to make a series of revelatory remarks, including her terrifying warning that Israel would target every school, every mosque, and every second house. I'm going to show you the video, by the way, just after this article, so brace yourself. She literally said that every school, every mosque, and every second house is a legitimate target of Israel. Throughout the Gaza war, the media discourse has favored the Israeli side. Again and again, false or unchecked stories emanating from Israeli sources have been treated with respect. An investigation by Declassified UK showed that the claim by an Israeli news channel that 40 babies, children, were beheaded in October was run uncritically on the front page of almost every British newspaper, despite being untrue. The same happened with Israeli claims that Al Shifa hospital in Gaza was really a Hamas command center. Israel can exaggerate or fabricate claims, Declassified noted, paving the way for an unrelenting operation of ethnic cleansing, safe in the knowledge British media will sing from the same hymn sheet. I am haunted by one other consideration. It is not just that Western commentators, columnists, and chat show hosts often don't know what they're talking about. It's not even that they pretend they do. It's the comfort of their lives. They sit in warm, pleasant studios where they earn six-figure sums for their opinions. They take no risk and convey no truth. If there is one lesson to be learned from Hartley Brewer's recent outburst, it's this. We should pay much less attention to journalists like her and much more to those incomparably brave reporters risking their lives every minute of the day to tell the world what's really going on in Gaza. Many of them, Hartley Brewer, may be interested to learn, are women. This is incredibly well written. By the way, one of the journalists who was in the Gaza Strip a few years ago, she's a Lebanese Christian journalist, Radi Francis. She was in Syria also covering the war. She's a colleague. She's a very good person. And she's coming to my show, by the way, on Monday. Again, 5 p.m. Central European Time. I think it is 4 p.m. GMT. So brace yourself. If you have questions to ask her, just for the context, we're going to speak about, of course, Gaza, Hezbollah, the regional war, etc. In the region, and her being a Christian and supportive of Hamas. She supports Hamas and supportive of Hezbollah. I want to ask her why, as a Christian, she supports these groups. And I'm going to push back a little bit against Hamas because I told you many times I'm not a fan of Hamas. So I want to counter argue her argument. So if you have any question, guys, post it in the comments below when I finish this conversation, because tomorrow I'm not going to do live streaming. I'm going to do restart the live streaming on Monday again. So I will read the questions and I will see if there are any questions that I can get extract from your questions. And since she was speaking about the British ambassador to the UK, this is the video when she said that every house, every second house, and every school and every university or every mosque can be targeted. Take a look.
Those areas must be destroyed. And one of the things we exposed to the world after getting into the areas in Gaza, that we try to find all those tunnels and the underground metro city that Hamas has built, thanks to this great support of Iran, Qatar, the international community generosity, everything turned to be this horrible terror city. One of the things we realized that every school, every mosque, every second house has an access to tunnel. So this is, and of course, ammunition.
But that's an argument for destroying the whole of Gaza, every single building in it.
So do you have another solution how to destroy the underground tunnel city, that this is the place where the terrorists hide, where they have all their ammunition, and this is the rockets that are still fired on Israeli cities?
By the way, this is the same ambassador that she refused the two-state solution, and she said there is no two-state solution, there is only one solution, and that is Israel. And the Brits have organized a campaign, expel the Israeli ambassador from the United Kingdom. I posted the link in the live chat. If you want, you can go also to change.org and sign a petition if you want her to be expelled from the UK, expel the Israeli ambassador from the United Kingdom, and because she's calling for genocide and all this stuff. So Okay, I just want to check one comment that one of our friends said. This is the comment: in the 2024 and onward, I want your channel to grow, Kevork. I also want my channel to grow. So guys, we have almost 400 people watching this video right now. Before you leave, I would really appreciate it if you can thumbs up, hit the like button. It recommends this video with other people, and also if you can share it on your social media accounts, I would be very, very appreciative about that. Send it to your friends if you want them to be also educated and enlightened of what's happening in the region. And if you want guys to support my independent work, you can become a patron. The link is scrolling on the screen: www.patreon.com/Syriana Analysis. And I will see you on Monday at 5 p.m. Central European times with Ready Francis. Have a nice weekend, guys. Salam.